In this video, I'm going to cover 7 activities that we can do in our gardens in April. In April, the days are starting to get a little bit longer and the temperatures are warming up too, which means that we can actually start doing stuff outside in our gardens. Woohoo! April is usually the first month we can really feel spring coming, and along with the warmer weathers, our gardens are starting to beg us for attention. Our lawns are starting to turn green and the trees are starting to sprout new growth. Now there's still the risk of frost where I live, so this is the right time for us to be thinking about working with our frost-tolerant, cool weather crops. April is still way too early to work on our summer crops outside because the soil hasn't warmed up enough and the nighttime temperatures still get too cold. I still have a few things left over from last year's garden that haven't been eaten yet, including about 5 quarts of tomato sauce and about a half dozen cloves of garlic. This year, I left the garlic on my porch. That was a mistake, and didn't put it away in a dark place. So the garlic that I have left is trying to sprout now. So I'm gonna need to use up the rest of this garlic fast. Next year, I'll be sure to store the garlic in a cool, dark place to prevent it from sprouting on me again. Here are 7 garden activities that we can work on in April in our gardens. I'm going to give you a quick overview of each activity here, but we'll dive into each topic in greater depth in the topic-specific section of this channel. Now, the first thing you can do is to start some seeds indoors if you haven't done so already. April's a good month to start peppers and tomatoes indoors to give them a head start. There's a lot involved with indoor gardening, and I dedicate an entire section to it in the topic-specific area. But if this is your first year gardening, I'd respectfully like to suggest that you skip this step this year. You're absolutely welcome to check out the content if you want, but I'd like to see you be successful this year by focusing your efforts on the specific areas and relying on your local garden centers to grow plants that you'll put into your garden this year. The second activity is to figure out what kind of garden soil you have and adjust it before putting any seeds or plants in the ground. Making your soil right before you start will give your plants everything they need to grow well, and I can't emphasize the importance of this enough. Once you know what kind of garden soil you have, the third activity is to fortify your soil by adding in compost and other fertilizers, I like slow-release fertilizers, and nutrients as a supplement to what you have. Now, if you're just starting out, you'll need to buy these fertilizers and compost. This makes all the things that your plants need readily available. Now, after you supplement your soil, the fourth activity is to mix up your garden soil so that everything is really well mixed and uniform. This process also aerates your soil. It kind of fluffs it up, which is really important because it lets air in and it creates space for the roots of your plants to grow into. It's important that you wait for your soil to be dry enough to mix properly. If your soil's too wet, you'll just be moving mud around, and that won't help. So wait for the soil to be dry enough to work. Now, on the other hand, if your soil's too dry, you'll just be mixing up dust, and that's no good either. So you'll need to add water to moisten up the soil a bit before you can mix everything up. My greenhouse is covered, so it doesn't get any rain or snow during the winter months. This means that the soil in my greenhouse dries out, and I have to add water before I can mix everything up. Now, once our soil is ready, the fifth activity is that we can start planting seeds of some of our cool weather crops that we want to grow in our gardens. We can plant radish seeds, peas, lettuce, beets, kale, cabbage, turnips, and any other cool weather crops that we want to grow. You might want to check out the video on planning your garden to see how to plant spring crops so that you leave room for your summer crops. Now, if we started some of our vegetables from seed indoors in March, our sixth activity would be to begin to acclimate these plants to outdoor conditions by moving them outside during the day when the weather's nice, or by putting them into a cold frame. And the seventh and final activity we can work on is to start a compost pile. Compost is pretty easy to make, and depending on the time of year and how much effort you're willing to invest, you can create compost from kitchen scraps, leaves, grass, clippings, and a little bit of soil in as little as 2 to 4 weeks. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I do a deeper dive into each of these areas in the topic-specific section, so check out any of those areas that you want to learn more about. Now, out in our April garden, the garlic we planted last October is showing itself, and it's already actively growing. Garlic will be ready to harvest in early July, and we'll get an early treat by picking the garlic scapes which are the flowers before they bloom in June. We're still picking spinach that was planted in our greenhouse last fall that made it through the mild winter we had this year. But I'll be picking all the spinach and pulling the plants out soon to make room for our other spring crops. We'll also be picking chives in April because they're perennials in our hardiness zone, which means that they come back every spring. Last fall, I brought some parsley plants into the greenhouse and was able to winter them over thanks to a mild winter. I brought the parsley back outside at the end of March, and I'm hoping for a lot of parsley this year because the plants are already well established. We'll see. I'll be adding a layer of compost to the top of my asparagus bed in April, and toward the end of the month, we just might start getting some asparagus from our asparagus bed. Now over on the flower side, the bulbs planted around the house are also showing themselves in April, and some of our perennial flowers and trees will be in bloom. April brings us pretty sights and fragrant smells of flowers like hyacinths, tulips, daffodils, as well as from our forsythia bushes and our dwarf cherry and pear trees. Now it's too early for some of our perennial flowers in April, but we'll see green growth from them, from our irises, coneflowers, dianthus, phlox, black-eyed Susan, salvia, daylilies, bachelor buttons, and lupins. And the leaves will be popping soon from our crabapple and dogwood trees as they come out of dormancy, which will give us flowers later in the month and into May.